Welcome to the China-MENA podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Fulton, a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and a political scientist at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates.
During the COVID and China kind of realized, hey, there's a lot of misperceptions, a lot of misunderstanding and bias against China, according to their understanding. So the action emphasized they said we should develop better narrative, better image, and better stories to counter those narratives, to counter those bias and prejudices.
Since at least the Hu Jintao era, China has made a real push to boost its global image and increase its international cultural presence. This is partly meant to address the gap between China's tremendous economic power and its relatively limited influence in an international system long dominated by Western powers. It is also seen as an important way to provide Chinese narratives about the country's people, culture, and ambitions. Simply put, soft power is an important tool in China's foreign policy. Here in the Middle East, Beijing has been working to project its soft power, and it seems to be paying off. Recent public opinion surveys by the Arab Barometer consistently show favorable, if shallowly held, attitudes towards China. This is an especially interesting contrast with many other parts of the world where views of China since 2020 have been noticeably less positive. What is China doing in the Middle East to help it develop a better image? To discuss this, I'm happy to introduce our guest for this episode, Dr. Xiaojin Cai. Xiaojin is a professor of international relations at the University of Sharjah here in the UAE and formerly worked in the UAE's Ministry of Culture and Youth. He has spent a lot of time thinking and writing about China's cultural, educational, and religious outreach to the Middle East, including, and please forgive the shameless plug here, but including a great chapter in my recent book, The Routledge Handbook on China-Middle East Relations. Xiaojin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. Nice to see everyone here.
Yeah, it's great. It's my pleasure. Xiaojin, just to start generally, you'll find statements from every major Chinese leader over the past 20 years about the need for more soft power, focusing on culture, media, entertainment, and education. Can you give us a quick overview of what China's been doing to project its soft power globally?
China's push for soft power or soft power project mainly started during the early years of Hu Jintao's reign, which is early 2000. And in 2004, China established headquarters of a Confucian Institute in Beijing. And this, I think, coincidence with China's confidence that, okay, now we are developing economy globally, and we need also to project or export our culture influence globally. So there's this national pride, national rejuvenation desire, drive from there. Globally, China has established many institutes and centers and has funded many programs to project Chinese image and to improve Chinese perceptions among foreigners and to establish a culture and media educational cooperation products with many countries around the world. In particular, we will see that China's push for soft power is rooted in its strong desire for national rejuvenation and strong desire for to be able to recover its lost glory, let's see. So there's this public foundation there, and in particular we can see there's a for example, I can list more later if you like. Just give you a quick example. Confucian Institute has been very well known already, And plus, then China is building media presence in many parts of the world. For example, Xinhua News Agency, the official news agency of China, has rented the largest screen, outdoor screen in the Times Square of New York City, and there they can project the Chinese stories and Chinese report, every day. Actually, short, both as an advertisement and also the image of presenting Chinese culture and Chinese achievement. And China has given a lot of fund to support the overseas media drives in different languages, in Spanish, English, French, Arabic, etc. And this is like about media. And then China also exporting the Chinese culture product, like different provinces they have the dances, performances, and specialized produces, and they work with culture centers abroad to promote this, both as a business and as a cultural product. And recently, you will see China also promoting the high tech. So they use all the technology and short videos and social media to present the story of China. And it's here in the Middle East. You will see many Chinese technology company promoting their product, their brand, and here. So you see both drives from public and private sector are pushing toward this goal of projecting Chinese soft power.
That's a really good overview. Thanks for that. So, looking specifically at the Middle East, North Africa region, then, is there anything specific that China is doing to develop its soft power across the region? Is there something that sets it apart from other parts of the world?
Yes. First of all, when you project the soft power to this region, you have to look at the characteristics of this region and historical ties of this region and with China. So always that is the starting point. So apparently, when China is pushing soft power here, they realize that there's a dramatic or huge difference between Chinese civilization and Chinese culture vis-a-vis Middle Eastern culture, be it Arabic, Islamic, Persian, Jewish, Judaism civilizations, which has long history. So China often, evoke this, historical ties. We heard this, long history of exchange between Chinese and Arab civilizations, like Silk Road, has been always evoked. In the very two important platforms, state level platform, China Arab State Economic Cooperation Forum. Now it's become China Arab State Expo, and also there's a China African Summit, or like a China African Cooperation Forum and China Arab Cooperation Forum. Among these forums, you will see it's every year they put the cultural cooperation, cultural exchange, people to be Christian as one of the pillars of this forum. And whenever there's this state visit and this summit happening, the culture is one of the part. Of course, in the beginning, it's meant to be like exchange. Chinese will learn something about Middle East, and the Middle East learn some in terms of China. But in practice, it looks like a little bit uneven. Chinese culture is much more dominant. China have more resources and funding to support culture projects to be present in the Middle East, and not the other way. Middle East countries are often not very active or resourceful in terms of projecting their culture or their soft power toward China. Plus, there are some restrictions inside China always. You cannot really openly promote certain kind of cultures or religions or ideas. So I think that's actually really tells the Middle Eastern China soft power thing. To be specific, when China are promoting their soft power in the region, I think they always use these historical figures, which actually build a bridge between China and the Middle East. For example, this famous Ming general, Admiral Zheng He, who sailed his fleet sailed across Indian Ocean to Middle East and to East Africa. So that always is evoked, and there's some forum actually dedicated to do that. And in the early days, I think they invoke sometimes the Islam, how Islam is spread to China and how these two civilizations, Islamic civilization, Confucian civilization, has coexisted a long time.
One thing that you mentioned when you talked about the Silk Road, ancient ties, this is something that any of us who spend a lot of time reading official statements from Chinese and Arab leaders, this is a point that's often emphasized. Our civilizations have ties that go back for generations. But at the same time, I find when I talk, especially with my students, with younger people, there's not really a lot of cultural familiarity with China. It still seems that people don't know as much about China as they do about, say, the UK or India or France or the US. So, but I wonder, because you mentioned just now when you were talking that that it seems to be a one-way projection, that China's bringing a lot of its culture and cultural products to the Middle East, but you don't see a lot of Arab countries doing the same. So I wonder, in China, is there that familiarity with Middle Eastern cultures and civilizations, or is it a case of both sides still being somewhat limited in their understanding or awareness of each other?
It's the latter, as you said. So both sides has a limited understanding with each other compared to their understanding with, let's see, with the West, with Europe, Americans, and with their neighbors, apparently. There's many reasons for that. So they can name a few like Kung Fu or Chinese medicine, all this, the very popular things, But other than that, they knew of very little about the Chinese culture or even Chinese modern transformation and modern achievement. So that's, I think, is one of the things respond to your question, that they have very limited or little understanding, even somehow like a benign misunderstanding of Chinese culture or of China. Also, we should not forget there's a majority of their understanding of China actually coming from English or Western language sources. So they don't have much, their own understanding of China from their own language or their own interaction.
I think that's an interesting point you made a couple of minutes ago when you talked about how a lot of their knowledge from China is coming from not directly from China, and often not directly from their own sources, their own language sources, but coming from a third place, whether it's in English or in French. And I think that's part of why China's been working to address this soft power shortage. You often hear Chinese people talk about media hegemony, that a lot of the stories about China are being told by Western countries. So they perceive a need to kind of take ownership of those stories, to deliver them in a way that they would rather see it presented. So I can see why in the Middle East, especially in a place where there's a long tradition of information flowing, especially from the US or the UK or France, for China to say it's important for us to try to get in there and tell these stories on our own and try to present our image in a way that we find reflects who we are in a more meaningful way. Yeah. So you talked about people-to-people bonds, and I know that in the Belt and Road White Paper that was released way back in 2015, it listed 5 cooperation priorities, and people-to-people connections was one of them. So obviously, this is something that the Chinese government considers quite a priority, to be working to develop these cultural connections. And it was very broadly defined, talking about media, education, religion, personal connections. I want to ask this question first pre-COVID, because obviously this has changed a little bit. So Before the pandemic, how did this look in the Middle East region? Were there a lot of student groups or tourism or educational outreach or religious groups that were driving these people-to-people relations in a big way?
Yes, before COVID, people-to-people exchange, and in particular Chinese tourists, Chinese students, study tour, Chinese delegates have been, we should say, pouring into Middle Eastern cities, especially like regional hub like Dubai, sometimes Cairo or Istanbul. So you will find so many Chinese in those places. Like for example, tourism we can see consider like not really pure only about soft power or culture exchange. It also has an economic side. But with this economic business implication, you see Chinese presence or Chinese influence here. In many hotels in the Middle Eastern cities, they offer Chinese TV channels, Chinese newspaper, even Chinese sleepers, and like they try to cater for Chinese tourists. I think this in turn actually slowly will disseminate the understanding of China toward the local population. In terms of education, Confucian Institute already established here long before the Belt and Road Initiative. I think first one, actually not very long, sorry. It's about in 2010, first Confucian Institute was established in the UAE, in Zayed University, and then slowly establishing other universities in the Middle East. I think so far around 20 to 24 Confucian Institute has been operating in Middle East and MENA region and South African region. Even actually during the COVID, they opened one in Saudi Arabia, which often will be seen as very conservative and the heartland of Islam. Now they allow Confucian Institute to be open in University of Jeddah. So, and in terms of media, in late 2016, 17, Chinese they established this huge media plan. Basically, found all the media establishment of program all over the world, including the Middle East. So they established CCTV, Arabic, and they try to establish the People's Daily in Arabic or in regional distribution. And there's Chinese International Radio has also Arabic or Middle Eastern languages options. And plus there's some public-private partnership between Chinese state and Chinese entrepreneurs. They came to the Middle East, they established some Chinese media companies or media channels in order to promote Chinese culture, but also promote business and promoting finance between the two countries and finance and trade. So, and plus, I think there's annually the conferences, workshops, academic exchanges, student visit. Many universities in China has established academic exchange cooperation program with university in the Middle East in terms of language training, in terms of science and technology, and even in the advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and cloud computing, etc. So it looks like a full-fledged cooperation and people-to-people exchange has been in play. Partially, I think, at least from the Chinese side, I can tell is that many of these project or initiative actually, because they are encouraged or even funded by different government or provincial fund or basically financed by them. So once they establish cooperation with here, they get support from some educational fund or scientific fund or the Silk Road fund. So this actually, which makes this people-to-people exchange much more. We have to remain to be seen whether it's effective, whether it's long-lasting, but at least the phenomena is there, and we will observe more later.
So I wonder obviously I haven't been to China for a few years now, but when I used to go pretty regularly, I was often visiting different university campuses. And one thing that always stood out to me was just a huge number of international students. And I know that the Chinese government offered a lot of funding opportunities for students to go and do a bachelor's or master's degrees, not just in language, but, as you said, across the sciences, the humanities, just a proper university education. Did you see a lot of students from the Middle East who go to China and do their degree in a Chinese university and develop the language skills and develop, over four plus years living in China, developing that cultural understanding as well?
Yes, there's a lot of Middle Eastern students going to China, but there's uneven among the countries. For example, in GCC countries, these oil-rich countries, I think they send more students to Europe and USA than they send to China. And one phenomenon is like Saudi Arabia actually trying to send 1,000 students at one point to China. Like there's one statistics published by authorities. Once like they have 1,000 Saudi students in different universities in China. So that was I think it was like height.
What year do you?
That's around 2010. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, as you said, they study many subjects. Majority of, I think, they focus on languages and science, technology, engineering, and medicine. Actually, many people study medicine too, especially Chinese medicine. We can see that there's non-GCC countries from Middle East, like Egypt, Jordan, sometimes Morocco. I've seen many of these students from this country studying very good universities. Often they are funded by the Chinese Ministry of Education. There is this fund which specifically tailored toward foreign students, in particular students from developing countries, from Africa, from South Asia, and including the Middle East. So many students actually had took advantage of these scholarships and studying in Chinese universities. And many of them, after they finished the study, actually started working either in China or in Chinese companies. Here, actually, for example, in the UAE, you find many state companies and even private companies. They hire Arab working for them. So it looks like apparently these students tend to have, positive view of China. One example I can give is like in 2020, during the early eruption of the pandemic, and there's a lot of media criticism against China. So some of the students from Iran and from Middle Eastern countries, they come out on social media and defending China. So that was interesting anecdotal. We don't know if it's like whether they're paid by some organization to see it or they just come voluntarily. But I tend to believe it's a voluntary thing. It's on their own social media, so they don't have to do it. So it looks like they gain some positive views when they start in China. Yeah.
Well, I saw it firsthand. I think it was in 2017 here in Abu Dhabi, the International Book Fair. China was the guest of honor, and at our university they sent a delegation of world-class authors. Yu Hua and just these great authors, great accomplished authors. And I was scrambling trying to find somebody who could do translation from Chinese into English for our students, because they were coming to meet our students. And when the delegation arrived, they actually had two Egyptian grad students who were studying in Beijing, and they translated from Chinese into Arabic. And this sounds obvious, but I've been at this university for years. Usually what happens is people speak to our students in English and they expect our students to understand English. And the Chinese came in and said, no, we'll speak to you in your own language. And the students were really pleasantly surprised because they don't see that very often here. So it was, I thought, quite smart. I don't know if that's soft power or if that's just smart diplomacy, but it was really effective, I thought. A follow-up question. So you've described what happens pre-COVID in terms of people-to-people outreach. So during the pandemic, has China had to change course? Has there been a way to try to develop these people-to-people relations in a world where it's very difficult for Chinese to travel outside the country and it's very difficult for people to travel into China?
True. Since the pandemic, I think the dynamic changed, and apparently they have to shift, as we are doing today, to online, for digital diplomacy or digital soft power projections. So even with pandemic, I mean, China did not really stop the soft power projection toward the world and toward this region. So they keep doing the culture diplomacy or economic diplomacy, health diplomacy, vaccine diplomacy, what all these diplomatic drives through online meetings, online forums, online exhibitions, and digital ceremonies, etc. It's remain to be seen whether they are effective or not, compared to the offline ones, traditional ones. But it's still doing that. In fact, during the COVID, and China kind of realized, hey, there's a lot of misperceptions, a lot of misunderstanding and bias against China, according to their understanding. So they actually emphasized, they said we should develop better narrative, better image, and better stories to counter those narratives, to counter those bias and prejudices. Even Xi Jinping, I think last year in one of the high-level meetings, he addressed to the thing, what in China this soft power they call international communication or international culture communication. This is the term called 国际传播. So this is when we are doing international communication, we need to be more smart and we need to develop lovable images, lovable. So this is the word he used. So basically that's you need to soft, you need a good image, So now they realize, even more, even during COVID, they need invest or develop better strategies, better approaches for soft power and culture diplomacy.
Well, that's interesting because, especially during the pandemic, what we've seen is, in many cases, the opposite of lovable. And with the narrative often being wolf warrior diplomacy or a much more strict delivery of how Chinese people want the rest of the world to see it. And I know when I talk to people in the U.S. or in Canada or in Europe, they obviously respond to this. But as I said at the start, when you look at the polling data or the survey data in the Middle East, people see it differently. And I think that's consistent with a lot of countries in the global South where, China wasn't seen in the same negative light as it was in a lot of democratic countries, primarily democratic countries. I don't know if it's about regime type or government type or if it's just about geography, but really over the past few years, China seems to be developing a much more positive image across the Middle East.
Yes, I think this has many factors contributing this. There's a certain country, they don't have much media freedom. So then those public opinion polls may not really reflect accurately. But there's this another possibility, what I call this the Chinese offhand approach. So yes, we are doing business with you, and we are doing exchange with you. We provide you with Chinese languages teaching, and we bring Chinese media programs, entertainment, etc. But Chinese. They said we are not forcing to adopt it. We are not claiming, we're the right one. Our value is universal, and you have to adopt it. I think Middle Eastern countries had some trauma or certain type of reaction when you try to impose even though like democratic values and many this good uh, ideology, let's see, in terms of certain standard. But if you using force to impose on them, or using some certain threat or certain like uh, how do you say you see the arrogant attitude, right? You try, then maybe you will not get many good response. So I think Chinese way is much softer and much offhand. Uh, Although it can be seen, it's not like China want to do that, because China knows, even though China want to say, oh, well, our value is the best, our culture is the best, they would find very little agreement even in this uh, region where a lot of positive or favorable view are toward China. So, but anyway, I think this balanced and offhand approach maybe explains why China is favored in certain sectors of the society, or the Middle East and then other countries. And maybe other reasons we could see, China did some foreign aid
Yep.
programs, and
Medical aid.
medical aid and loans and many infrastructure projects. They see that they did not add any conditions. Let's see, so they don't ask for reforms or any things. So if that's hold true, then yes, it's not surprising. These regions will favor China than other countries.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. I hear that very point frequently when I talk to people from the region, where they say, that they appreciate that Chinese lending institutions or development agencies don't place the same kind of restrictions or conditions. They feel that projects more respect, that it seems less colonial or less arrogant. So it seems to be something that really resonates. That you made a couple of good points in that, and one of them is when I mentioned the Air Barometer survey, they do say that some of those favorable opinions seem a little soft, just because, like you said earlier, that there's still not a lot of real deep cultural awareness yet. So their initial feelings are that they feel better about working with China on certain things, but they don't yet know completely what it's all about. And I think that also is consistent with what you've been saying, that there's still a lot of room to grow on both sides of the relationship. But one question I'd like to ask you about is, as I said, I've been teaching here for quite a while, and my students, when they talk about China, it still seems that they're speaking from a place where they don't know as much about China as they do about a lot of other places. But if I say other countries, like for example South Korea, they get very excited. I lived in Korea before I came here, and I was surprised to learn that my students want to hear all about my experiences there, because they know that they're studying the language, and they love the shows and the movies and the music. So just looking at China's soft power projection compared to other countries, some of these soft power heavyweights like South Korea, like Japan, like India, do you see any interesting points of comparison or contrast with what China's doing in the region, or China's success or room for development?
Yes, actually, China has a lot to learn from these countries in terms of soft power projections. Uh, One apparently, in the Middle East, the countries you mentioned, other Asian powers like South Korea, Japan, India, they have much more soft power influence than China. One reason maybe they have a longer history dealing with the Middle East. I think Japan, South Korea has started dealing with Middle East in 1960s or at least 70s, and India has much longer history because of the proximity; they are nearby. And Bollywood and K-pops and Japanese comics are so popular among the young people in this country, and I think apparently many other Arab youth too. Uh, if you have to nail down like what exactly there is a Chinese cultural product which can compete or can be comparable to those countries, and unfortunately you find none. So China is such a huge size and a big power, but does not really have very distinctive and a prominent cultural product. So it's like you eat Chinese hot pot. You have everything, but there's nothing you can just pin down that this is the China reflect China. Besides, maybe early days we can talk about Chinese kung fu or medicine or etc. But again, in Chinese medicine and Chinese kung fu, there's no one product or one brand you can name down. This is the one which will be popular, which will be accepted, which reflect Chinese soft power. No, because when you talk about Chinese kung fu, there's so many branches and sects, and it's kind of confusing people. Actually, I worked with some kung fu groups in this country, and they are trying to promote Chinese kung fu. And sometimes Chinese universities or Chinese cultural foundation give them a little bit of support. But when they promote it to the young people here, they said, okay, is it different from karate? How is it different from this, Japanese style, jiu-jitsu? Because, it's just like too complicated and too sophisticated for people to absorb about the Chinese culture product. So because of that reason, I think, China needs to learn how to, refine, how to transform and even commercialize or modernize, capitalize its culture content resource into a popular culture product. That's why the reason being China is not doing this good is because many of these soft power products are pushed by the Chinese government, the state actor, not by the private company. Even there's sometimes you see the private company try to push for this, and they are not. I think it may take time. They are not as successful as the culture product from those countries. I had a similar experience as you do when we ask about China. My students is a little bit at loss. They cannot name like a thing which will reflect what is about China. But when you talk about countries like India or Bollywood, Korean, then it's I know Korean this star, I know that star, and I know this show, etc. Recently, there's some Chinese TVs, and especially reflecting the ancient China, where you have extraordinary decorations and interesting plots. You might attract some foreign audience, including the people from Middle East. Actually, quite a lot of my students talk about some shows they watched. Actually, not watched from Chinese, not from CCTV Arabic or some Chinese cooperated TV channels, but from Netflix, which is the American platform. So you see, Chinese product need to be put on American platform in order to gain popularity, it seems. So there's many areas Chinese culture entrepreneurs, Chinese government, and soft power practitioners need to work on in order to present a better narrative and a better image and better product.
So I guess this is interesting because I'm thinking about Joe Nye's, the classic definition of soft power, the ability to attract based on, values or an attractive foreign policy or these cultural products. And one thing you like when you describe Japanese, you mentioned anime and manga. And when you talk about Korea, you talk about K-pop and these dramas in Korea or in India, rather, with Bollywood. A point you mentioned, a lot of this stuff are coming from private industry or private actors. And I wonder if that's an important distinction too, because I think in China, as somebody who reads a lot of Chinese novels and likes a lot of Chinese film, Chinese creative people have often complained or just maybe just pointed out that they do face a lot of restrictions in the stuff that they produce sometimes. And that maybe Chinese popular culture content creators or authors or filmmakers might do this with an eye to, is this going to be acceptable? Will I have to be able to get this past a censor? Do you think that might play a role in how some popular culture stuff travels or doesn't travel easily? Is it that some of these things that might be made for a more of a local audience in China rather than a global audience?
Yeah. First reason, I think the second reason you mentioned is because China has huge market for these private content creators. So if they have to, they will first cater for the Chinese audience, let's say, right? And they can sell a lot. China has the largest film viewership in the world. So uh, now, but there is this, drive, or there's this demand for Chinese creators and the content distributor to go abroad. Uh, Censorship play a role. Many of those, I think, apparently, there's this issue of degree of media freedom and degree of what should be talked and what shouldn't be, and a lot of this Chinese content are very context and country specific, so which doesn't travel well beyond its borders. And even though I think there's uh, a few I think movie I can name, the aimed at international audience. They want aim to, like, let's see, global audience. They go to Hollywood, and the famous director Zhang Yimou made a few, and others made too. Those who are like the popular internationally, and they will get very bad reviews inside China. So you see this very interesting contrast, and I think that's still need time for Chinese culture entrepreneurs and content creators to find what is the best, how to present Chinese image, Chinese stories, and Chinese good content to the global audience. And so as I said, China is relatively new, only 20 years something, when China starts seriously think about presenting itself to the world, seriously think about soft power projection.
Okay, well, just to wrap up, what do you think for future trends that you're seeing or you anticipate for China's soft power in the Middle East? It seems every single day there's a half dozen articles or headlines about how China's playing a bigger role in the region. So just in terms of these cultural or people to people or religious or educational, what is it you anticipate playing a bigger role in driving this China-Middle East relations?
At the end of the day, it's the growth of China-Middle East relations actually will reflect the fundamentals. Fundamentals are energy trade and economic cooperations and between the two regions, and actually culture or soft power cooperation or projects could play a better role or bigger role than the current status. Currently, I see actually they still have much room to improve and much to catch up. For the various reasons, for the China as a newcomers, China has not familiar with this region, doesn't have much historical experience promoting soft power, etc. So, if in the future China Middle Eastern relations improve in terms of strategic cooperation, for example, now recently there's this discussion about to establish China Gulf free trade, right? And also improving, promote more energy trade and expand even to some military technology corporations. So if that's will grow, then I think according to the soft power, we also need to grow accordingly. They need to learn Chinese. They need to understand Chinese culture or Chinese practice better in order to have a lasting and better and effective communication when they are trying this energy, strategic, technology, military, and security cooperations. So even though soft power and the culture exchange cooperation between the two now are very nascent, very new, but I see it will play a bigger and bigger role in the future if China Middle Eastern energy and economic trade continue to grow. Already we are seeing many more countries are there encouraging their students to study Chinese language and to have more technology cooperation with Chinese companies and institutions, despite there's a pressure from USA and from other actors, which warn this could curtail the interest of their interest or some other aspect. But I think cooperation is still going on. Middle East need to have its own independent voice or agenda. If they want to develop genuine good relations with China, they need to train their sinologists, their Chinese speakers, their China observers, so that they don't have to always learn from the Western media or Western intellectuals or academic establishment. They could have their own. What I'm seeing is that infrastructure need time to build. China apparently can help the Middle Eastern country to build this knowledge infrastructure to understand China better, to cultivate relations between the two better.
That's a really good point to end on. I think that's what we're seeing is as we've both seen where we are here now, especially in the Gulf, it's still at a very low level. But here in the UAE and also in Saudi, the public school system is starting to teach Chinese language. You're going to have a coming generation of local students who go to university that already know quite a bit about China, and I expect we're going to see quite a significant shift in the next 10 to 15 years. Xiaojin, thanks so much. This has been really helpful. I think you've really helped us understand what China's soft power in the region looks like, what are its ambitions, what are its limitations, and you've given us a lot to think about. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Follow us on social media, subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next show. Thank you very much.
This podcast was produced by Heartcast Media.